months too late, at least in terms of the Pikes Peak gold rush. It is not until the middle of 1859, about 9 months after there is the first flurry, that there is gold in the Pikes Peak region and there is settlement of Auraria in Denver City, that the first Jew arrives in Denver, or at least the first identifiable Jew, Fred Solomon. Soon with his two brothers, Solomon and the Hyman of this, they are omnipresent characters. One is an avid prohibitionist. The other is part and parcel of the beer business in town of that, but they don't settle on Capitol Hill. At the time of the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, Denver was a tiny community of about 4,000 people centered near Cherry Creek and Larimer Street, what is today Capitol Hill, the area east of Broadway, between about Cherry Creek and 20th Avenue, stretching all the way to Colorado Boulevard, was an abandoned prairie grass area. The Indians still officially have possession of the area. As Denver starts growing in the 1870s, when the population explodes from 4,759 in 1870 to nearly 37,000 people in 1880, the bulk of the elite settlement was by the city's first park, Curtis Park, at 32nd and Curtis Streets. And soon the Solomon brothers are living there. Another crucial figure that is settling in there, another early Jew of Denver, is Louis Anfenger. Louis Anfenger, over the years, has his fingers in everything of that. And typical of what happens is he has an infant son in 1872, and he sees that a bris is necessary properly to bless his infant son on that, and to make sure that there's a congregation that is available for such blessings. Louis Anfenger takes the lead in creating Congregation Emanuel, that becomes incorporated as Temple Emanuel in 1874. The original home of Congregation Emanuel is near 19th and Curtis Street, sort of the far western edge of the burgeoning Curtis Park neighborhood. In no time, Temple Emanuel has outgrown that building, moving over to a new facility, which is still standing at 24th and Curtis Streets. And before long, there's sort of this chicken and egg relationship. A lot of Jews land up coming in and settling on the Curtis Park neighborhood because the synagogue is nearby there. The synagogue is nearby because the Jews are nearby of this. And among the people that is pushing, trying to define a Jewish community at this time is again Louis Anfenger, and he also lands up taking the lead of going and creating Lodge 171 of the B'nai B'rith in Denver. He helps go and form something called the Progress Club, which was something of the forerunner of the Green Gables Country Club and the Town Club on Capitol Hill. Also in the early 1890s, actually 1889, he's another of the people out there pushing for the creation of what becomes National Jewish Hospital. And National Jewish Hospital is the second oldest Jewish institution on Capitol Hill. And it was created in the name of health. And before National Jewish comes on the scene, the institution of death defined the Jews on Capitol Hill. The first Jewish burial in Denver is in 1860, and it is in what is today Congress Park. In the spring of 1859, to show that Denver is a great city that has a distinguished burial grounds honoring the dead, Denver town founder William Larimer, working with William Clancy, stake claim to the land that is today Cheeseman Park from about 13th Avenue, from the alley of Franklin Humboldt Streets to 8th Avenue, up to the alley of Clayton Detroit Streets, over to between 10th and 11th Avenues, to the alley of High Race Streets back to 13th Avenue. And in the eastern section of this land, about where the parking garage of Botanic Gardens is located these days, became the first Jewish burial grounds officially incorporated as the Hebrew Cemetery in 1866. And as Denver grows, as Jewish Denver is part and parcel of the burgeoning city, the population of the Hebrew Cemetery grows. However, by the late 1880s, as Denver is booming to a community of nearly 107,000 people by 1890, land around the cemetery is starting to grow up as the elite Capitol Hill neighborhood, a place where block after block after block of elite single-family mansions, distinguished apartment houses, the neighborhood of affluence, of power, of dignity in town is growing up. There's this idea, we don't want the dead in the middle of Capitol Hill. Let's go and transform this area into a distinguished central park. And it's not until 1896, after officially the old Denver City Cemetery has become Congress Park, later Cheeseman Park, that the Jews land up announcing that they are going to relocate the bodies from what is today the Botanic Gardens parking lot out to other burial grounds, especially Rose Hill, a little later Mount Nebo Cemetery, but they never completely relocate the graves. Back about 1924, Temple Emanuel, which still had official title to the land and which had moved the bodies from Cheeseman Park to Emanuel Cemetery out at Fairmont Cemetery beginning in 1911 of this, it pondered building a new home there, but passed on that, and it more or less forgot about the old Hebrew cemetery until after World War II. And at that time, the city was cutting through Josephine Street between 9th and 11th Avenues. And as crews were digging up the area, they kept coming across bones. And whenever you come across bones, work has to immediately cease, and they have to call in the coroner to make sure that there's been no foul play. And the general contractor is frustrated by this. The project is soon behind schedule, over budget of that there. And so he starts telling the workers, those are some nice rocks you found. Why don't you put them in the dumpster or back in the ground where you put them of this there? And the area sort of gets redeveloped amidst that, but the bones are still out there. And part of this is discovered about 20 years or so ago, late 20th century, the city is straightening out York Street between Botanic Gardens and what was then the parking lot. And right at the property line, the workers discover some bones. And the question soon is, are these Jewish bones? Or are they Catholic bones? Because directly to the west of the Hebrew cemetery was Calvary Cemetery, which was the Catholic burial spot. And before long, there are intense disputes between the Jews and the Catholics over what religion the bones belong to. And amidst all of this, Joyce Foster, who was then president of city council, intervenes and she sees that her husband, Rabbi Stephen Foster of Temple Emanuel, takes charge. And as anybody that ever met Rabbi Foster well knows, once he's in charge, you have a nice compromise. You do things his way on that. And under his direction, the Jews agree with the Catholics that these are Jewish bones and the Jewish community pays to relocate them at Emanuel Cemetery at Fairmont, which, by the way, is where Francis Jacobs, seen on the screen, is buried itself on that. Then a few years after they move those bones, they are digging up the old Hebrew cemetery to build the parking garage, and they find all sorts of caskets, other funereal relics itself on that. So definitely it's holy grounds where you park your car over at Botanic Gardens. Well, meanwhile, Frances Jacobs is part and parcel of early Jewish Denver. She is born Frances Weisbart about 1839 of an immigrant German Jewish family in Cincinnati. At a young age, she is betrothed to Abraham Jacobs, who's about 7-8 years her senior. And Abraham Jacobs is one of these guys that's always running around, always involved in some new venture. He makes a fortune, he loses a fortune, he makes a fortune, loses a fortune with his brother-in-law, Frances Jacobs' sister, Benjamin Weisbart. He's an early settler in Denver. He soon is a key figure up in Central City. He's running a leading clothing store there. After it's badly destroyed by fire about 1874, Frances and Abraham Jacobs relocate to Denver. He's soon running a leading clothing store at 15th and Larimer Streets, while Frances is a young mother. And she is seeing that not only is Denver a burgeoning city that is rapidly growing, but besides all of the city's progress, there's a lot of poverty as well, and somebody needs to do something about this. And towards that end, she soon is a one-woman relief army. Whenever there's a bad fire, an emergency, a homeless crisis, freezing weather, Frances Jacobs is on the scene offering aid and assistance, and she always goes around with a big briefcase, which is something of her first aid kit. And among the things she has in her first aid kit is plenty of soap, because wherever there is a need for soap, is her ethic amidst all of that. Well, about 1886, she lands up collaborating with a leading Congregationalist preacher, Myron Reed, and they both agree it's ridiculous to have one emergency drive now and then another emergency drive and half a dozen plus charities all begging for money simultaneously. What Denver needs, they agree, is a united charity organization society where all the recognized charities in Denver will get together. They will have one coordinated fundraising drive in the fall. They'll weed out imposters, and they'll make sure that the overwhelming bulk of the money goes to those that are in need, officially the worthy poor, as they are known. And on this basis, Denver supposedly claims to be the foundation city of the National United Way in 1887. There's only a three problems with this. There had been numerous other United Charity Society organizations in the country. And in the process of writing its history, the United Way wiped out Frances Jacobs' role of all of this there. It announced that the United Way was founded as a partnership between a Presbyterian preacher, Myron Reed, very correct, a Catholic priest, William O'Ryan, who is then recovering from tuberculosis up in Breckenridge, and a rabbi, William S. Friedman, who is still a seminary student in 1887 in Cincinnati, and they make no mention of Francis Jacobs. And Francis Jacobs, and that's Rabbi Friedman right there, but when the United Way broadcast national advertisements with this message in 1887, the Francis Jacobs family bitterly complains, and the National United Way listens and says, oh yes, and a Jewish woman from Denver also played the role. Well, meanwhile, Francis Jacobs is just this whirlwind of energy running around until in torrid weather, about 1891, of this, she collapses of heat stroke. The doctors put her in bed. They tell her, you need to rest up. If you don't rest up and go and regain your health, you are not going to be able to help anybody. But being in bed, Francis Jacobs just can't take it. And there's people in need. There's emergencies out of that. And this is the situation in snowy, cold weather in early November 1891. She gets out of bed. She's soon running around. The next thing you know, she collapses and dies of pneumonia at age 51. There is an overwhelming mourning of her passing of this. And among the people that try to build on her contributions are the sponsors of the Jewish Hospital Association. In the course of the 1880s, anti-Semitism is sweeping the globe. And since Denver is always a very trendy city, if they can discriminate against the Jews in Moscow and in Petersburg and in Paris and London and New York and Chicago, we can discriminate against the Jews in Denver. And nobody is more bigoted against the Jews in Denver in the 1880s than the WASP establishment and many of the Catholic wealthy of that. And though Jews helped create the Denver Club as the society of the wealthy in 1880, soon no Jews allowed in the Denver Club. In 1884, Jews helped establish the Denver Athletic Club. Soon no Jews allowed in the Denver Athletic Club of this. And meanwhile, the German Jews are very embarrassed by the massive influx of East European Jews in the course of the 1880s. And the German Jews are middle class. They see themselves as blending in as modern American citizens, joining with their fellows regardless of creed for the betterment of all. And they're shocked by the anti-Semitism. And a lot of them don't like the East European Jews. They are still speaking Yiddish. They're wearing medieval garb. They have these untrimmed beards, mustaches, of that. And a big drive of the German Jews is to try to Americanize their Eastern cousins. And meanwhile, tuberculosis is the country's leading killer disease. And medicine does not have any real treatment for dealing with tuberculosis of that. At the best, doctors will sometimes go and recommend that victims of what's called the white plague of this go to a dry, high, sunny climate. And already in the 1870s, Denver is promoting itself as nature's fortress against infection. The place that has air that is an elixir to the breath and velvet to the cheek. And all you have to do to recover from tuberculosis is to come to Denver, breathe in its healthy air, and you will recover from tuberculosis if you are wealthy. It doesn't work if you don't have the money to rest up for a healthy diet, for personalized medical treatment. And soon Denver is treating poor consumptives as a blight and a menace. And the Jewish community announces, we will take care of our own. And towards that end, in 1889, they acquire land on the far eastern edge of the city at Colfax and Jackson Street, where they announce they are going to build a Jewish tuberculosis sanitarium, the Jewish hospital of that. And when Francis Jacobs dies, they decide it's going to be Francis Jacobs Hospital. She didn't support the drive for the Jewish Hospital Association. Disease, she pointed out, doesn't have any creed. Therefore, healthcare should not have any creed, and that any medical institution has to be a non-sectarian institution that is open and available to all. But despite this, the Jewish Hospital Association announces it is creating Francis Jacobs Hospital, and by 1893, it has completed its first building, the pictured Francis Jacobs building of Francis Jacobs Hospital. However, before anything can happen, the economy completely collapses in 1893, and the sponsors of Francis Jacobs Hospital lack the funds to fill the building and set it into operation. So it just is sitting there for the next 6 years until national Jewish organizations, especially the B'nai B'rith, take charge of it. And towards that end, since national Jewish organizations are supporting it, it becomes known as National Jewish Hospital. And by this time, Rabbi William Friedman is very much a mover, a shaker within the community. He's on the board of National Jewish Hospital. And before long, he is saying, I created the United Way. I created National Jewish Hospital. And towards that end, he sees that the institution renamed the Francis Jacob Building the William Friedman Building. Well, part and parcel of National Jewish over the last century, 125 years from the beginning, is the place is constantly building, constantly demolishing, constantly modifying its buildings itself. So the Francis Jacobs William Friedman Building lands up coming down about 1948. The picture is an aerial overview right here of the National Jewish Complex looking to the east of that. And I'd say, again, that's probably about 1950 or so, by which time Colfax is in the foreground. The hospital building has landed up disappearing of that. Well, meanwhile, Capitol Hill is coming into its own as both the elite Denver neighborhood and very much a Jewish neighborhood by the 1890s. And what happens on this is Henry C. Brown is a carpenter who is headed out to California in 1860 with his new wife, Jane. And Jane is having a terrible time on the road. She doesn't want to go through the mountains. And once the Browns have settled in Denver and rested up here for a few days, she tells her husband, you can go to California if you want to. I'm staying here. I'm not traveling anymore. So Henry C. Brown lands up settling in the community. Soon he's a foremost contractor and gets involved in the great American sport, the defining Denver business institution, real estate speculation. And in 1864, Denver receives something called the Congressional Grant. This is an act by Washington that officially defines Denver's original boundaries. Colfax is the southern boundary of the city, where the Platte River meets West Colfax at Larimer Street. is the westernmost point of the city. What is the equivalent of 26th Avenue, 1 mile to the north of Colfax, is the northern boundary, and Broadway becomes the eastern boundary. Seeing this, Henry C. Brown soon stakes the land directly to the east of Broadway between 11th Avenue and 20th Avenue, and it's on a hill. And what's going to really distinguish it as a hill, he decides in 1868, is he's going to donate land in the middle of it, Brown's real estate subdivision, to the territory of Colorado for the Capitol building. Hence, the Capitol is going to be on the hill. The area becomes Capitol Hill. And soon Capitol Hill becomes very, very much an elite neighborhood. It's isolated from the center of the city. This means that those who are living there have to have the extra income in order to be able to commute. Water rates are extremely high, but you want to have a huge estate, lush landscaping on that. And before long, there are numerous streets on early Capitol Hill, centering from about Sherman to Logan along Colfax, that are all calling themselves Millionaires Row. And if the Goyim can go and flaunt their wealth on Capitol Hill, the Jews can do so as well on this. Among the early Jewish settlers of Capitol Hill is Otto Mears. He's born in Lithuania, born to an English sailor husband. His mother soon dies. His mother's family doesn't want him. They ship him to England. His father's family doesn't want him. They ship him to New York. The New York relatives don't want him. They ship him out to San Francisco. And the relative that is supposed to meet him in San Francisco never shows up. So Otto Mears grows up very much as a street hustler along the way. He joins the Union Army during the Civil War. For the most part, he's policing Indians in New Mexico during the war. After the war, he moves to southern Colorado, where in no time he makes an immense fortune as first a toll road builder. Then he is a railroad builder. And before long, anybody that can come to Denver, once you've established your fortune, you do so. He settles over at something like Colfax and Washington, about where Argonaut Liquors later has its liquor store out of that there. So maybe there's a continuity of people just being drunk with Capitol Hill as part of the activity and actions that are going on. And meanwhile, other Jews are moving into Capitol Hill from Curtis Park, especially in the wake of the crash of 1893. And by this time, William Friedman is at Temple Emanuel, and he is determined he is going to build Temple Emanuel as a congregation second to none any place of Jewish shuls across the country, second to none of any Denver religious bodies itself of that. And straight out of the seminary at something like age 21 in 1889, he takes charge as rabbi of Temple Emanuel of this. And before long, it's outgrowing its house of worship at 24th and Curtis Streets. And members are starting to debate, maybe we should build a new home on Capitol Hill. And right as they are debating this issue of that, fire badly singes the Temple Emanuel building at 24th and Curtis Streets about 1897. And amidst all of that, they decide they want a new home as the pictured 16th Avenue and Pearl Street of that. So they decide we are going to have a distinctive style. Let the Christians have their Rococo. Baroque, Romanesque, Gothic houses of worship. We are going to have a Moroccan-style temple in town, something commemorating the golden age of Spain of that itself. And on this basis, Temple Emanuel moves to its new home about 1899, soon settles in, is rapidly growing, constantly expanding. In the mid-1920s, it doubles the size of the building by putting in a new southern wing of the temple itself. And by this time, Jewish businessmen are omnipresent. There are numerous Jewish-owned shops along Colfax, and this goes on until the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, Denver has this impression that anything that is old is obsolete, is no good, is run down, is decayed, and where you need to go are elite new areas along the way of this, and no place is more favored by elements of Jewish Denver that were living on Capitol Hill than Hilltop. And go talk about how you get showers for all of the current Temple Emanuel these days in a bit. Well, anyway, what happens is Hilltop, the section more or less east of Colorado Boulevard from about 8th Avenue to Alameda to Holly Street, maybe Monaco Street, depending on a broad definition of that, had already started to emerge in the early 20th century as an elite, overwhelmingly Christian area, but Jews want to move in there, and nobody is more pushing the Jews to move to Capitol Hill that than Philip Milstein. Philip Milstein grows up near Colfax and St. Paul. His family has links to everything from Cotopaxi to the early ski business, the tennis business. He's an all-star tennis player in high school itself. He gets involved in the family's cold storage business. Of that, he becomes an extreme Denver booster. In the 1950s, he briefly serves on city council. For some years, he's the head of something called the Downtown Denver Improvement Association. Among his various drives is that Denver needs to create a new Auraria campus for Metro, University of Colorado, Denver, and Community College of Denver. He claims he is the man who says 16th Street has to be transformed from this heavy traffic arterial into an idyllic pedestrian mall, on and on. Well, at the same time, Phil Milstein is very active in Temple Emanuel. He emerges as its president around 1950. And by this time, he's living on Hilltop and is investing in Hilltop real estate. And in particular, he is strongly urging the members of Congregation Emanuel that instead of trying to modernize, expand their existing building, they need to relocate on Hilltop. And he more or less gives them land up near about First Avenue and Grape Street. Of course, it's not a total present. There's always the idea if the synagogue relocates over at First and Grape Street, the surrounding land in which Milstein also had an interest is going to escalate in value. But anyway, on this basis, Temple Emanuel lands up abandoning its Capitol Hill headquarters in 1956 for Hilltop. Amidst all of this, the First Southern Baptist Congregation of Denver takes charge of the old Temple Emanuel. It holds prayers there for about the next 20 years. The building is empty for a few years in the late 1970s when Maurice Gordon comes on the scene. Maurice Gordon is a big Bible-pounding Pentecostalist preacher that is out there to save wicked Denver. He is recruiting a loyal core of disciples around them, and he is having them evangelize Broadway, evangelize South Broadway, Colfax of this itself. Now, one of the ways you have to be an effective evangelist is by being a powerful preacher, somebody who knows their voice can carry. And soon, under Maurice Gordon's, his Loving Way congregation gets a hold of an old Lutheran church at West 3rd Avenue and Acoma Street, and he orders his disciples to get up into the steeple of the church and preach all night long as necessary. And the people living close to 3rd Avenue and Acoma are not about to be saved by Loving Way. They go and they consider the whole place an utter nuisance on this, and they drive out Maurice Gordon and his followers, whereupon they take possession of the 16th Avenue and Pearl Street Temple Emanuel. Well, by this time, virtually no maintenance has been done on the building for 25 years. It's extremely expensive to heat it. The stained glass needs treatment. The bricks need pointing. The heating system is inefficient anyway. And on this basis, under Maurice Gordon, Loving Way prays for a savior, and God answers them with Doug Hall. And Doug Hall is a Connecticut insurance broker whose family comes to Denver after World War II and soon is heavily investing in real estate on Capitol Hill, especially close to Temple Emanuel. And along the way, Doug Hall is frequently going and demolishing dilapidated old apartment houses on Capitol Hill for parking lots. And some see him as a slumlord, as a parking lot titan itself. And he drastically announces a rent hike at Temple Emanuel at 16th and Pearl Street about 1983. And Loving Way can't afford it. And amidst all of that, they decide they're going to relocate elsewhere, whereupon Doug Hall announces that maybe we need a new parking lot over where the Temple Emanuel building is. And when he announces that he may well demolish the old Temple Emanuel, there's a lot of outrage. There's a lot of fond memories of Jewish Denver about the building, but nobody in Jewish Denver is willing to step forward with the cash in hand necessary to buy the building at Doug Hall's rather extreme price of that itself. But Doug Hall really doesn't want to tear down the building. He owns the nearby real estate, and what good is having just parking lot after parking lot after parking lot if there's no institutions nearby where people will want to use the parking lots of that? And there is this long, convoluted fight to try to save Temple Emanuel. Amidst all of this, everything from the remnants of the Skyline Urban Renewal Project to plans for a housing project by the Denver Housing Authority to political muscle by City Hall combine about 1986, where officially the building becomes the Temple Event Center that is owned by the city, but is really run and managed by private interests. And the idea is going to be a performance hall, a rental space. It's available for religious services, political meetings, rallies, other such things. And money is still lacking. The repair bills are sky high in terms of it there. And the Temple Event Center never quite delivers as promised on that. Meanwhile, the housing authority does put in new affordable housing just up the block from there at Colfax and Pearl Street there. And amidst this, around the turn of the 21st century, something called Pathways Church comes on the scene. And Pathways Church is sort of this magic Jesus church where you simply say, Jesus, 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 and you are saved. And the places like that often grow extremely rapidly, especially with a charismatic preacher of this. A lot of young Christians join places like that because they're excellent dating clubs, socialization opportunities. The problem is soon the young Christians often will meet somebody, get married, and now the church doesn't quite have always the same allure. And there are tensions and disputes and other things. And about 2010, Pathway Churches collapses. In recent years, it's been home of a congregation reaching out to the gay community, lesbians, trans, queers, whatever term you wish to use on that itself. And just a few months ago, it landed up working with the city where it has transformed the parking lot directly to the south of the old Temple Emanuel into a fenced off tent village for the homeless, where those with no other place to stay can indeed occupy a safe, sanitary tent of that. And so those that are living there that don't have the indoor plumbing can clean up their act. You usually have a shower van parked in front of the old Temple Emanuel there. But I see I only have 15 minutes left on this, and there's all sorts of other things to go. In terms of Jewish institutions today, again, you have life and death as defining keynotes of that. The oldest Jewish institution that is still part and parcel of Capitol Hill is the Intermountain Jewish News. It lands up emerging around the time of World War I, when the forerunner of the Allied Jewish Federation, Jewish Colorado, needs to issue a 4-sheet paper of that within a few years grows into the Intermountain Jewish News, that grows into being a privately owned facility of that, owned by the Goldberg family, which it's been today. And the Jewish News, as being sort of your old-fashioned newspaper, says a great location for a newspaper is in the central city, right near where all the action of the politicians, the power brokers, is located. So were for years in a place that just got demolished in about 13th Avenue and Sherman Street. They moved a block over to the southwest corner of 12th Avenue and Grant Street these days. Another pre-World War II Jewish institution that has survived in the area is Feldman Mortuary at 17th Avenue and York Street. And Feldman Mortuary occupies an old mansion, maybe appropriately for many years a leading Christian physician had his quarters in there. Who knows what kind of bodies physicians leave behind out of that itself there. There used to be an old Jewish mortuary over near about Lincoln and 14th Avenue. But for years, the Feldman family that marries into the Cohn family has run Feldman Mortuary. And the irony of this is that beginning at the end of World War II, Jews are increasingly going and fleeing from Capitol Hill. That they consider it an old, dilapidated, no good neighborhood. And then they land up being caught dead on Capitol Hill, that at Feldman Mortuary. Other institutions that have also been related to Jewish Denver, that is pictured is the BMH building of that when the place is being totally renovated about 20 years ago as a Jews for Jesus congregation, church in the city outreach program of that. And it's sort of ironic, that is right when the new BMH at 16th at Gaylord Street is being built. About 1919, 1920, 1921 or so of that itself. And what happens with the BMH, and there you have the Hebrew School of BMH, and before they built that as the Denver Hebrew Center about 1937, they had an old mansion there, which was a Jewish community center, but mostly the BMH Hebrew School. Today, that is the church school program of the church in the city, and it's Jews for Jesus branch, Congregation Beth Abraham, and that's where they are planning to locate the new French American School of Denver on that. And there you have a old typical Capitol Hill mansion at the northwest corner of the 8th Avenue and Clarkson Street. And for years that was known as the rabbi's house, because that's where Rabbi William Sternberg Friedman of Temple Emanuel lands up settling in of that. And in 1938, he's all set to celebrate a grandiose 50th anniversary as rabbi of Temple Emanuel. And before he can do so, his health completely collapses. He resigns, retires as rabbi, moves out to California, where he dies about 1944. Ironically, there is a religious aura about the house where back in the course of the 1970s, Bishop William Fry, who was the head of the Colorado Episcopal Diocese, made that his house as a kind of group home, along with the Ann Brady, the maid of the Brady Bunch, in terms of that there. Leopold Goldman was another of the wealthy Jews that was part and parcel of Capitol Hill for many years, and he ran a place called the Golden Eagle Department Store down at about 16th Street and Lawrence Streets itself. That building is destroyed about 1974. It was sort of ironic that here you have the Golden Eagle of Goldman, and the Blue Eagle on the lower left corner is of the National Recovery Administration of the New Deal. Of that. Well, meanwhile, there is where Leopold Goldman moved about 1920. That house was located along 13th Avenue between Williams and Gilpin Streets. It becomes a school. The Anna Ragland Randall School. Before he had moved in there, Goldman had lived in a mansion at the southeast corner of 10th Avenue and Humboldt Street. That later becomes the home of Frederick Bonfils, the owner publisher of the Denver Post. That's destroyed about 1968 as well. That itself, and you can go block after block, and there you have another crucial figure of Jewish Denver on Capitol Hill was Isidor Rudy. He's a poverty-stricken, consumptive merchant tailor of East European antecedents, comes out to Denver of this, and he makes a reputation of selling excellent suits at a reasonable price, and he calls himself the little tailor because he has to get up on his step ladder. He's a small guy to measure big customers, and that becomes his business card of that. Along the way, Rudy is a close friend of Rabbi Charles Kavod, who is rabbi of the BMH from about 1903 to 1953. That is Rabbi Kavar's house of his later years at 1330 Gilpin Street, close to Cheeseman Park of that. And among other things, Rudy gives the BMH the land where it builds its congregation home at 16th and Gaylord Streets. He also is a loyal member of the B'nai B'rith, and he gives the B'nai B'rith money in 1928 to buy something called the Progress Club building, which was at the southwest corner of Colfax and William Street. And the Progress Club emerges as a home of Jewish high society of the mid-1880s, when the Jews find themselves exiled from the Denver Club, the Denver Athletic Club. Originally, the Progress Club had its headquarters over at about 21st Street and Glenarm Place, and seeing that all the fashionable people and locations are on Capitol Hill, in 1913, it builds its location there. Before I go on with that story, that's where I learned to be afraid of shots and inoculations. That is the center of the Jewish pediatricians of Denver right there. That was built shortly after World War II by Dr. Max Ginsberg, a pioneer local pediatrician who soon, with a couple of partners, Jules Ampter, I want to say Solflex, I'm not sure of that, creates something called the Denver Children's Clinic. And in the generation after World War II, half of the kids that are growing up on Capitol Hill, plus many of the Jews, boys and girls, are seeing Dr. Ginsberg and associates over there of that. Well, meanwhile, back to the Progress Club building, it has meeting rooms, it has game rooms, it has a basement with a small swimming pool, bowling alley, gymnasium. However, by 1928-29, the Progress Club wants to play golf instead, and it basically liquidates itself as a city club when it buys what becomes Green Gables Country Club, whereupon, with money from Rudy, the B'nai B'rith gets a hold of the old Progress Club building and turns it into the B'nai B'rith Rudy Community Building, which about 1948 officially becomes the Jewish Community Center of Denver. And the Rudy building wasn't simply a Jewish community center. It was a Capitol Hill recreation center, community center. A lot of non-Jews patronized it. Those that would then go over to see Dr. Ginsberg and they were a little unhealthy, he might recommend they go over to the JCC and learn to swim there or get involved in the recreation, gymnastic programs itself. They had dance programs, performances constantly. But amidst all of that, the building is getting old while the drift is going on ever more to southeast Denver. And about 1958, the JCC, working with what was then the Allied Jewish Confederation, does a census of Jewish Denver, and it claims that ground zero of Jewish Denver was at about Alameda Avenue and South Dahlia Street, where it decides this is where we need to build a new Jewish community center. When that lands up opening in 1962, there's no effort to save the old B'nai B'rith Rudy building, turn it over as a general Capitol Hill community center. Instead, it gets sold to Frontier Oil that soon knocks it down. And there's a Conoco at that site today. But I see I'm running out of time here. There's plenty of chats and other things. So I don't know whether I can figure out anything there. Yeah, there's East High School was showing that, the old Gove Junior High School along the 1300 block of Colorado Boulevard once time had this overwhelmingly Jewish enrollment out of that East High School until the opening of George Washington High School in 1960 had a very heavy Jewish enrollment as well. And even when I was in the East High School in the late 1960s, there was still a lot of legacy of a Jewish tradition at East itself. And there probably is still a lot of that going on today. That itself on there. So I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. I'm just getting started on all of this. Can't even get into Miller Hill of the Joe Miller family or other things like that. If you want to hear me rant and rave some more of that, I'm going to be giving a little talk. It's a place called West Side Books at West 32nd Avenue between Julian Street and Lowell Boulevard on Saturday from 2 to 4. I'll be on the Auraria campus, which incidentally has some very interesting Jewish history, at a place called Casa Mayan, 1029th Street on Sunday between noon and 2 o'clock. So all I didn't talk about today, you have to read the book now to find out what the rest of the story is.